Carl Jung documented why people with what we now call empathic abilities face a cruel psychological paradox. Their greatest gift becomes the source of their deepest pain. He discovered that empathic individuals unconsciously attract people who project their shadow onto them.
And this, my friends, is the version of internet slop that I like to call psychobabble. You know, I'm stealing that from a good friend of mine, Joe Nucci, who was recently on the Dream Show. And, you know, I see it all the time. I've never had like a word for it, but this was recently sent to me by a follower, and it's called Why Empaths Attract People Who Secretly Resent Their Light. Sometimes people will make content on the internet that just uses a lot of psychology words to sound good, but here's what's fascinating about it. Usually it's garbage. And I actually, this video is 34 freaking minutes long. I didn't even know TikTok allowed you to make 34-minute long videos. But what they'll do is they'll put a lot of big words together so it sounds really smart, but it's actually saying nothing. I feel like SNL did a skit on this. And so let's take a look at this and learn how to recognize psychobabble, where people will use clinical terms to try and sound smart or to convince you of something that's not actually true. Secret, it's actually a form of hypnosis, and I will explain it to you here as we go about. So listen, we're already, you see, 34 minutes long.
Carl Jung.
But let's talk about this piece by piece, because we gotta work through this, man. Like, it's just makes me nauseous. I think it's like when you've had good food and then you like taste garbage. It's yucky. But if you have not had like 10 years of experience working with clients and a master's degree in counseling, this can sound like really good information when I think it's in fact garbage. Let's see what their claims are.
Documented why people with what we now call empathic abilities face a cruel psychological paradox.
And that was when I knew. It was that sentence. Empathic abilities face a cruel psychological paradox. We're just throwing words together here. First of all, what do we mean by empath? Because that word is so overused in our culture today that nobody knows what it means. There is actually no definition in the DSM about what an empath is. That's not a thing. It's a cultural term. And typically, the best definition I have seen, like that's close to a clinical setting, is an empath is somebody who can feel other people's emotions as if they're their own. Right? So they're very intuitive about those things, and they can feel those emotions personally, even though they're not their own emotions. Now, two things about that. People love to call themselves empaths, but the truth about it is we call that codependency, and we call that enmeshment and attachment problems, all this kind of stuff. You should be able to differentiate between what are my feelings and what are somebody else's feelings. And if you are motivated to change your life or do something based on somebody else's feelings, there's a problem there that we're gonna need to take a seat on the couch and work through. And so there's this huge feeling that like an empath is like the best thing that you could be. We all want to strive to be empaths, and that's just not the case. So that was step number one. We're already throwing out the empath term, but maybe they're trying to use a catchy hook. Right? I get it. TikTok's a competitive thing. I use catchy hooks sometimes. Maybe they're trying to gain attention. Then they start to talk about this like psychological paradox and the psychology of empaths. And it just gets muddier.
Carl Jung
muddier.
documented why people with what we now call empathic abilities face a cruel psychological paradox. Their greatest gift becomes the source of their deepest pain.
Now that can be true. If you have great abilities, sometimes that can be the place that you experience very intense pain. You know, if I'm really, really good at like analysis or business, I may struggle with my emotions. I'm so far this way, it's tough to be that way. Or maybe I'm so emotional and intuitive and spiritual that it's hard for me to balance my budget and my finances. That makes sense. So there's an element of truth there, but watch as we lose that thread of truth and kind of come back to nonsense.
He discovered that empathic individuals unconsciously attract people who project their shadow onto them.
There we go. It didn't take long, did it? Didn't take long. They project their shadow, and people who are empaths unconsciously attract people who project their shadow onto them. Number one, Carl Jung was so loved and admired because he was the protege of Sigmund Freud. Sigmund Freud was very dogmatic about things. They had a falling out, Sigmund Freud and Carl Jung. Carl Jung was the protege of Sigmund Freud, but they had a falling out because Carl Jung said to Freud that he was too dogmatic and that he needed to loosen up. There's a lot of nuance to it. And so with this video, I already feel like we're off to a bad start because Carl Jung wouldn't say people are this way. If you are this, you are that. If this is happening, then that is happening. He believed in the collective unconscious and the flow of archetypes through us, and that we should be in tune with each of these archetypes inside of us. And so for him to say, or this video to say, that if you're this, then this is happening, already is off to what I think is a bad start and not true to the way that Carl Jung would kind of work through things. So furthermore, what is this shadow projection? Here we're using big terms to sound fancy when we could explain it simply, which would be more helpful for the general public. Shadows are the parts of ourselves that we hide, right? I am a clinical mental health counselor, very proud of that, emotionally intuitive, but maybe I hide that part of myself and I feel ashamed of that I'm bad with my budget, right? Or I'm very bad at like organizing my schedule. That's a shadow, right? Because the front of me, my emotional intelligence is so bright, the shadow of that is I'm not very good with planning, right? As an example, right? And so an empath is going to attract those who have shadow complexes. Let's look a little bit deeper.
People who resent the becomes the source of their deepest pain. He discovered that empathic individuals unconsciously attract people who project their shadow onto them.
Everybody attracts people with their shadow. The shadow is just at play. It doesn't make sense to me how empathic people are more likely to attract those with shadow stuff, because Carl Jung believed that everybody has a shadow. And the shadow is not bad. What Carl Jung believes is that we should make the shadow conscious. Everyone has a shadow. If I'm showing you a part of myself, there's another part of myself I'm hiding. We should just be more fluid about it. And so already that part doesn't make sense. But let's keep looking specifically what he's going to say. And then that might just have to be the end of the BS that I can deal with.
People who resent the empath's emotional freedom because it reminds
That's what's weird to me. Empaths typically don't have emotional freedom because they're so wrapped up in other people's experiences.
them of their own emotional numbness.
Broad statement. So if you're not an empath, you're emotionally numb. Like what? Let's say somebody has low empathy, right? Like somebody with narcissistic personality disorder, maybe somebody with antisocial personality disorder, maybe even with a stretch, you could say somebody with on the autism spectrum. They don't have that social emotional awareness or reciprocity in the same way. They have very intense emotions. They're not numb. I would say those with narcissistic personality have even more intense emotions than your average person. They're certainly not numb, but empaths, if we're going to use the cultural term, often find themselves in relationships with narcissists because the empath will forget what they are feeling and follow with and be persuaded, manipulated even, by the intense emotions of the narcissist. So already, you see, we're using big terms that sound nice, but it doesn't make any sense. Here's the part that I want to share with you before we get any further. And maybe this is all that you really need. This is a form of hypnosis. When we use big terms that we don't consciously understand, our subconscious is forced to process that information. This is the pattern of trauma. When I go through life and I have an experience that's so big and so terrifying and so intense that I don't know how to process it, the subconscious comes out and says, don't worry, I'll take care of it. Now, sometimes it gets it wrong and it gets trapped, and that's where the trauma is. But when we use big terms like this that we don't consciously know what they mean, unless you're a trained professional, it kicks into the subconscious. And so the subconscious pays attention to the emotional flair of it and says, well, I don't know what all these words mean, but it's said with AI images, even at the bottom of this video. I mean, you can see it right here. It says creator labeled as AI generated. It flips over to the emotion. It's like, well, it's said with a very deep and serious voice, like somebody who really knows what they're talking about. There's all these images of pensive thought and deep, like intuition and insight about emotions. And so you're being hypnotized. It's suggesting this is true. This is deep. You can trust this. The person that is speaking these things is very intelligent. It's an AI generated voice. And then I'm using such big terms and long sentences that we can't understand it. And it sounds smart, but it's not. And that's where I get frustrated with these kinds of videos. But for funsies, let's read a little bit more. And I would love if I'm missing some, or you want to watch the full video, link will be in the description. Leave a comment and a like while you're down there. Share with a friend. I'm trying to grow the channel and bring good mental health information to others, specifically about subconscious understanding. And let me know which ones I missed, and if there's some crazy claims later in the video that you want me to also react to. But let's see here what we got.
Jung found that the more authentic and radiant someone with highly developed feeling function becomes, the more they threaten others' psychological defenses.
I don't even know what that means. The more emotionally intelligent you become, the more they threaten someone's psychological defenses. Think about what that's saying. If you become healthy, you're going to be more threatening? No. I mean, maybe to somebody who wants to control, abuse, and manipulate you, yes. But if you become more mentally healthy, the world becomes an easier place to navigate. This is not true. If you've got good emotional intuition, things become easier for you because you can avoid obstacles and pitfalls. It's only that more cultural definition of empath that I think gets us into huge trouble, because then that individual who is empathic is losing the authenticity of what their feelings are and just feeling other people's feelings as if they're their own. And the biggest part of this, I didn't even say this, but the biggest part of this is that individuals who call themselves empaths most often are just projecting their own feelings onto other people and saying, that's what they feel. I'm an empath. I know. Most of the time when I meet a real empath, they have no idea. And if you ask a real empath, like how it feels, they don't know what you're talking about. They don't realize that that's happening. And they would tell you it's very difficult and very, very tough. That's something that a lot of counselors have to deal with. Oftentimes I can get confused about what I'm feeling and what is the feeling of somebody else. And I've had times where I'm literally sitting in my office crying on the floor, so devastated and distraught. And I pull myself up and I'm like, I have to get myself together in order to see the clients that I have for the day. True story. And so I sit there and I ask myself, I'm like, Jesse, is there anything that you are personally upset about or sad about? And I sat there on my floor and I was like, no. The thing that I'm upset about is the sadness and disappointment of another person. I'm not disappointed in myself. I'm not disappointed in the way that I handled that situation, but somebody else was upset with that situation that happened, and I'm taking that on as if it's mine. So I pulled myself together, took a deep breath and said, wow, I'm really grateful for that lesson, that I need to be very careful and aware of what I think are my feelings, because they might not be mine. And I need to be more diligent to test and understand what is for me and what is for somebody else.
What Jung called shadow projection,
there is that term, Jung uses it, shadow projection,
creates a pattern where empaths are simultaneously sought after and secretly despised for possessing what others have lost or buried within themselves.
Do you see this word salad of like psychological terms? It's an element of truth. Jung did talk about shadow projection, but I don't know what they're talking about, how that makes other people frustrated. Oftentimes those who are healthy will frustrate and embarrass and make shame feelings spontaneously emerge from somebody who isn't healthy. You ever met somebody who has their finances and life together and it makes you feel really shitty about yourself? I could understand that piece, but isn't that easier to say that way instead of using all these terms? I don't know. You tell me. Am I crazy? Am I on? Am I off? I don't think so. My years of clinical experience would say, watch out for this, especially long videos with big words and AI generated images and voices. It's probably garbage. If a person has gone and gotten a degree in order to practice psychology and mental health counseling, don't you think they would have the boldness to show their face? I don't know who this person is, especially with a name like Unconsciousian. we're making up terms here. If somebody spent their life studying this stuff, they're going to show their face, they're going to say it proud, they're going to show you their degrees on their wall. It's the accounts that hide their face and make AI generated stuff that we need to be aware of. And I feel like, man, I don't know. If you've clicked away from this video already, like, I totally understand. Maybe this is just for my longtime followers, but I felt a big shift in social media lately and a big shift in content. And I've struggled to understand. I've been so successful on social media, but I've struggled to understand this advent of AI and really where the shift of attention is going and where I fit into that. It used to be that I connected deeply with those on social media because we shared our dreams, but lately everything has felt so fake and unreal. And I think as I consider what my responsibility and role is in this changing landscape of social media attention, I do believe that my job is to help correct and identify the misinformation that's out there because it's dangerous. It's dangerous for people to listen to this stuff and then take it as fact and then live their lives based on it, because though this video is fake, the consequences of those erroneous beliefs is real. Hope that by subscribing, following, and sharing it with people that you care about, that I can do a little bit of good in the world to help keep it safer, protected, more educated than it otherwise might be. Education and information is the greatest tool and defense against manipulation, against disinformation, against division. It's not good. And I hope that I can be there to help support you along the way. Thanks for subscribing. Thanks for being here. And I'll see you in the next one. Bye.